I'll just kick things off by saying, Malin, thank you so much for agreeing to join us for Share the Responsible Edge this morning. I know you and I have connected some time ago, and it's been a real keen thing for us to get you on and talk to you about all sorts of things. So really appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to this.
Excellent. So Malin, as you well know, we kind of start the show with like a real look into your background and past, and in particular, kind of what influence sort of ethics and responsibility and sustainability have played in the decisions that you've made about, what you've chosen to do. Now, I know that you've done some really interesting things throughout your career, and we're not going to be able to do justice to it in 20 minutes, but start wherever you like. Some guests go literally back to school days and influences from then, and others start a little bit later, but start wherever you like and just give us a flavour of you.
Thank you. Yes, I will go back a little bit actually, because I grew up in Sweden, and I think that actually is a big part of the reasons why I've gone into doing what we do. So I don't know, in terms of just explaining what we do as a business first. So we help organizations unlock opportunities in the green economy or in the purpose-driven economy as well. But we haven't always done that. That's not always been how sort of we've framed our work. We're in PR, thought leadership, and we also offer training around sustainability, so carbon literacy training in short. But that's kind of evolved over time, and I think, hence going back to my my childhood, a lot of that comes from having grown up in Sweden. So I only came here in the late 90s, which might be a long time ago actually for some of your listeners, but for me, they might not even be born. But it's important because the culture over there is very different. It's a completely different type of society. And interestingly, I think that it sort of aligns with a lot of the new thinking that's coming out now. So, for instance, with a B Corp, and some of the values of being a B Corp is also very Swedish or Scandinavian. So the whole idea of being interdependent. So it's quite interesting when you become a B Corp, you get the certificate, and it's a certificate to say, a declaration of interdependence. I just think that's quite cool. And that is very much what the culture is like. Is more about working together than sort of promoting one or being individual. Which might sound quite deep, but it plays out in lots of different ways.
And out of interest, Malin, when you were born in Sweden, you grew up there. Did you move to the UK then as your sort of next stopping point, or did you travel or live anywhere else in the world, or was this the sort of next spot?
So my family is still in Sweden. It's only me that's here. So I am only Swedish actually. I'm not British at all. So prior coming here, I was also in Australia. So I lived there. I lived there once with an Australian family. Went to high school there and did that. And then I also went back and did some traveling around, basically. But I had 2 years there, which was quite interesting. So that was the bridge: Sweden, Australia, and then the UK.
You've almost sort of boomeranged yourself back. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And let me ask you, so I want to pick up on the independence thing. So when you got to the UK in the 90s, was it very evident to you that from a cultural and societal perspective that it was far more individualistic and far more sort of autonomous in terms of people's thinking? Was that something you really picked up on?
It's huge. And to be honest, in some respects, I've only realized in the last few years how that's impacting me and why I'm finding certain things challenging. So I'll just give you a really practical example how that plays out in Sweden. So you are not, in schools in Sweden, you're not allowed to stream kids at all. Everybody has to put kids into streams. So you can't say that, these are like the brighter kids and they're going to work together. And these are the kids that are in the middle and so on and so forth. Everybody it's against the law. Everybody has to be taught together. And the thinking is that, you're as an individual, you're learning to collaborate with people who are different to you. You're not just surrounded by people who have the same ability, thinking in a similar way, etc., and more often than not maybe have a more similar background, but you're kind of thrown in with everybody. And the other side of that is that if you're doing well, you're actually more likely to be sat with somebody who's doing less well. And the idea is that you support them a bit as well. Oh, and like people here would then think like, well, that's holding the kid back that's doing well. Well, it just gives them different skills, doesn't it? It gives them the skills of like helping, supporting somebody else, explaining what they know already, and
empathy, compassion, like thoughtfulness. Like, are these not, if you were, you've sold me already, Malin, on the Swedish educational system. That's. Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you want your children to be, what's the word? When you're, I've completely forgotten the word. But when you're exposed as a child to those sorts of influences, and that builds a much more well-rounded individual ultimately.
Exactly. Yeah. And I genuinely think that's part of like Scandinavia. So it's not just Sweden, but, all of the Nordic countries. Part of their success story, because obviously they're really small nations. Like there's only 9 million people in Sweden. There's like 3 or 4 in Denmark and Norway and Finland. And they're really punching above their weight, aren't they, in terms of having some really big companies. And I think it's part of the success because you get that rounded view right from the off. You don't have to learn that later. And also that's part of the reason why businesses in those countries are less hierarchical. It's a very, I find it really interesting to ask people here who work for Scandinavian or Swedish companies how they find it. And they always say that they find the consensual way that decisions are made really frustrating because basically it takes longer. But actually, and this is part of, obviously we're talking about this article in a bit. But interestingly, because you're embedding your thinking from the off, everybody's on board. So actually the implementation of what you're trying to do as a business is done faster. So you spend a bit longer embedding your thinking and getting people on board and helping everybody understand what they need to do, which can be frustrating when you're used to somebody being directional and telling you, this is what we need to do and this is how we do it. So basically I found when I heard about the B Corp movement, and we are a B Corp, I just felt like, oh my gosh, I've come home. It's more about, bringing everybody in and actually recognizing that great ideas can come from anywhere, and, as somebody that's leading an organization, you just don't see the detail, do you? You're operating, depending on the size, but quite often at that higher level, and you're not sort of at the coal face of the, the customers and all of those kind of things. So it's, I don't know. It's not, I guess it's not better. It's just a different way of doing it. And that's why I say, like, that's why that's so important. The fact that I'm Swedish makes me different. And I don't think I realized how much until quite recently, really, because you kind of just get on with life and all of that.
Fascinating. Well, look, Malin, you're not gonna get away that easily without not giving us a bit more on your background. So, born in Sweden, spent some time in Australia at school. Talk us through the early part of your career, maybe higher education. Just give us a flavour as to sort of what you were drawn to at that stage.
Yeah, so I always wanted to be a journalist, interestingly. I've always liked understanding stuff, deeply, and also helping other people understand things. So I wanted to be a journalist, but actually at the time in Sweden, it was virtually impossible. You had to have, the system is very different. I think it still is. So I had 13 subjects for my A-levels, and you had to get straight A's in all of them.
Classy, yeah.
I got good grades, but I didn't get 13 straight A's. So I couldn't be a journalist. I mean, it's just crazy. But it also goes to show like how high that profession was regarded at the time, isn't it? You know, like that. I'm guessing it doesn't quite have the same standing now. So instead, I studied English, because it's basically you can build your own degree. So I did 1 year of English, and then I did 2 years of what was called the Program for Information and Communication. So it's kind of, you know, similar to journalism, but obviously more for a business world. And again, I just think that's quite interesting, because we don't talk about it here. And I don't know what it would be really, but it's a very, very different way of thinking about it. And it feels like, you know, with some of the topics we're going to talk about in terms of greenwashing, etc., it's more about, you know, information and communicating that rather than the spin, you know, that you associate now with marketing and PR. And I then went, and the reason I came to the UK was because I did a master's degree then in PR. Okay. So because that didn't exist in Sweden at the time, so I came over here to do that and, you know, understand the more commercial aspect, I guess, of.
And Malin, I mean, it's fascinating, almost thinking about your experience in Sweden, even the 13 A levels that were required in order to study journalism, there's clearly a real value associated with the kind of responsibility that a journalist has to realize 13 in A grade A levels in order to even study it. And then going on to your degree itself, as you say, less about the commercial spin and more about just ingraining sound, responsible communications practices and principles within your way of thinking.
Yeah.
What was it like when you then came to the UK and you did a master's in PR? Did you immediately see that, wait, a lot of this is about taking the foundations of good communication and trying to find that spin, or was that not the case?
Well, so I guess a lot of the things that we learned, so a lot of the things I learned in Sweden was around like communication strategy. So more about like how you get your message across and like the social science bit of it, if you know what I mean. The bit I was missing was the business side. So, and obviously the MA, that a lot of it was that side of it, and then converting that business into communication, you know, talking about, you know, there was things about CSR and so on and so forth. So I don't think I thought about it that much on the course. It's quite academic. It doesn't sound very academic, but it was quite academic actually. It wasn't until I then started working that, you know, you just feel like, I think all students feel a bit like that. There's such a gap between what you studied and what you then end up doing, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, writing press releases and, you know, obviously this is my second language as well. So it was, you know, that was a bit of a challenge to start with. And yeah, it just took a while. And then I did find it hard to get my head around, you know, that storytelling, you know, the storytelling where you're, you know, you're communicating a particular, or you're trying to push a particular narrative that's not necessarily great, you know, particularly now looking back. I mean, we were all in that, weren't we? Whereas now it feels like things are changing a bit again.
And Malin, let just for our listeners, I'm sure will be very interested at this stage. So you finished the MA. Out of interest, where did you study the MA?
Here in Manchester. That's why I'm here.
Oh, in Manchester. Okay. So you're Manchester MAing in PR. Then where do you go to next? Where are your first sort of forays into the professional world? So
then I worked for a number of agencies, basically PR agencies up here. I wanted to go to London and then I was going to go back to Sweden, but then I went to like just outside London for a bit, and then I met my husband, so I kind of bounced back to Manchester, as you do. And then I worked for like a few different agencies, and then I ended up working for what is now one of Manchester's biggest PR companies, called Tangerine. And I joined them right at the beginning, and I was a director there. And then after a while, you know how these things go, you think, actually, I can probably do this myself. And then that was a springboard. So then that's when we set up Hattrick, which was in 2011 when we launched Hattrick. So,
and out of interest, Malin, with Tangerine, did Tangerine have any kind of purpose-driven kind of sustainability focus, or was that very much just in the sort of more general world of PR?
And it was in the general world of PR, but what I would say is, so this is like, you know, early like 2000s, and the MD, who's called Sandy Lindsay, so the owner, she always had a really strong ethical streak, like beyond anything that I'd ever worked with. So that really influenced me, and I really liked that, because at the time it was very spinny, I felt. You know, there was a lot of I don't know, things that you just wouldn't kind of get away with now. It's all about stunts and, you know, all the things you associate with PR, I guess, traditionally. And that's also the reason when I've started out, I've done both consumer and B2B, but we only do B2B, and we only ever did B2B, because it's a bit more serious, I guess, which is why I just can't quite get my head around the consumer side.
Well, you've clearly served your time in the B2C space. So you've earned the right to be in the B2B space. That's fascinating to hear about the owner of Tangerine, and how the leadership style, if you like, that she presented has obviously influenced you. Just talk us through then. In 2011, you're jumping into, you've decided, no, I can do this myself. I can do it my own way. What were the kind of, I know that Hattrick's proposition, as you've alluded to at the beginning, has kind of evolved and developed over the years, but what were the kind of founding principles that you set up Hattrick on? Like, what were the core values, if you like, of the organization at that point? So
I set it up with somebody. It was actually somebody from Tangerine as well, so we weren't that popular for a bit. But anyway, so we focused on B2B. We've always done a lot. We had already done a lot in the built environment, so that was like the natural space that we went into. And I guess we're both quite senior, and that's always been, and that's still the case today. You know, we haven't had sort of built that traditional, interestingly hierarchical structure where you have, like, you have your account director, associate director, and then account manager, and then execs, loads of execs, and that churn. It's just never been what we've been about. It's been more consultancy led than, the traditional, more tactical agency bit, I guess. And we've always been really interested in thought leadership, and I guess that lends itself well to B2B anyway. There's a lot around that, and obviously things have kind of come and gone in terms of what we do and how we do things. So back then digital wasn't so big, even though actually our first client was Google, interestingly. So we worked with Google.
That's quite the first name to put on the case study list of on the agency website. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So we actually helped them do some of the launching and rolling out of what is now it's a Google Meet now. Well, we just so that was really, and all the the cloud-based stuff that we take for granted now. So that was quite interesting, and from a B2B perspective. So it was very much in that space, and I would say already then, like, sustainability has always been a really big topic. For the types of businesses that we worked with, and it's something that we've done quite a lot on, both at Tangerine and then at Hattrick. So it was a natural interest, and and I guess once you start having expertise in an area, you get more of that, don't you? You feel comfortable with it, and what you're talking about. And then so we were we going along quite nicely for quite a few years, and then we decided that basically we weren't going to work together anymore. I was going to take the agency forward, and my business partner wanted to spend more time with her family because she had a younger family than I have. And that happened to be, by the time we had organized, basically worked through all that, when I then eventually bought the business out, that was the day before the first lockdown in COVID. So it was really awful timing. I had like all these thoughts and ideas about what we're going to do, but then obviously, everybody just hunkered down, didn't they? It was so hard, and we were still quite busy. So I just didn't have time to do any real thinking, but it was then off the back of that, coming out of that, I got 2 kids, and one of them was doing GCSEs and the other one was doing A levels at the same time. It was just not a nice time, very stressful. Yeah. And then, so I just did loads of thinking and just thought, I want to keep doing these things, but it has to have a bigger purpose, like it doesn't feel like it's not fulfilling me the way things are really. And then, I heard...
Malin, sorry to interrupt you, but was it anything? So was it the experience of the pandemic that really sort of stopped you in your tracks almost? We all had a bit of thinking time, I think, around the lockdowns, etc. Perhaps I know you had a lot on your plate anyway, but was it that sort of thinking time that really allowed you to think this through and go, actually, what I really want to do next is have more of that impact, and this is the direction I want to take Hattrick in? Was that a core part of the pandemic experience for you?
Yeah, in part. And actually, both my kids have, they have struggled a bit. Actually, they did extremely well at school. I shouldn't say that at all. But they're neurodiverse, both of them, which has made all of the things that I've, that I talked about in terms of going back to, what it was like in Sweden. I guess it's just all landed, when you think, because the during the lockdowns, etc., all of those things became even harder for them, in terms of support, etc. I don't know. I just thought it has to be a better way of doing things in general. Like all of that kind of came back and came to the surface in a way that I don't think it would have done otherwise. And they're both very bright. They're both at university now, but they needed additional support, and that was just hard. So there's that then, as well as obviously the environmental stuff. And what happened was that I listened to a podcast that happened to be about B Corp, and I hadn't heard of B Corps. And interestingly, B Corp isn't a thing in the Nordics. And I think it's because they already do a lot of it. It's like not a big thing. I don't know. I just think that's fascinating. Anyway, so and I thought, oh my gosh, that sounds like a good framework for working through what it is I want to do with the business and where I want to take it. And that's exactly what it is. I know that it's slightly controversial now, but it's an amazing framework for, literally, it's a guide. I was sat there thinking, like, how do I do this? And you can literally, it's all open source. You go there and it just shows you the way. Like, these are the things you need to think about. This is the plan, and you can crack on with it. So that helped kind of solidify that.
And Malin, what's the experience? And by the way, we've done the classic thing of absolutely obliterating our 20 minutes talking about you, but I've got a couple more questions that I want to do. How's that made the experience for you working on Hattrick, in terms of, like, how does it make you feel working on it now?
You mean compared to before?
Yeah.
So I think in some respects everything is a lot harder. So I'll say that it really is harder, because you have to consider, so many more things when you make decisions. But in other respects, it's a lot more enjoyable. Like, the community is incredible. I mean, that's the one thing everybody says, I think. there is so many people are very open, and not everybody, but lots of people are very open, very generous with their time, very generous with just supporting each other, I would say. And there's a lot of people working with each other within the community. And that obviously helps. And it also means that you kind of got your North Star. So it helps a bit from that point of view. You kind of know what you need to do. But I'm not going to lie, it is hard. It's really hard to do all the things that you need to do.
Well, it's a refreshingly real to leverage that. And I think, I would concur that whenever you're starting to operate in the kind of purpose-driven space, you are just taking on so much more of that needed consideration into everything you do, which is more challenging than it would be running something that didn't uphold those principles. Final question on you before we move on.
Yeah.
If you were to fast forward and get to sort of the end of, let's say the end of your career, Hattrick maybe still going, what do you want to be able to say about the work that you did?
I guess that we helped. So I think one of the big things for me is the responsibility, and understanding the responsibility you have as a communicator. So there's lots of different aspects to this, and obviously one of the things we're talking about is greenwashing. But kind of beyond that, helping people see the opportunities and try and bring, use our skills to get businesses going. So if we can help instill some of that impetus to move, I would be extremely happy to be able to, to have been able to drive some of that change and help people see what they need to do. Because I think that's the big thing that hangs over everybody. I think most people are willing to do, stuff, whatever they need to do, but I think they're not sure where to start. And they're scared of starting because they feel like they're going to be called out. They feel like they're late to the party. They feel like all sorts of things. But actually, if we can just get going, start the journey.
I think there's the word inspiration comes to mind. I think with agencies, we have such an opportunity to inspire our clients to think about things in a different way and to adopt these principles. Malin, fascinating. I knew we weren't going to be able to really scratch the surface on you in 20 minutes or so, but let's move on now. Would you mind introducing for our listeners the article by Stuart Wragg in Smart Company, the Australian publication from July this year? Would you mind just giving an overview of what's in that piece, and then maybe just picking out whatever the most interesting points were for you in it?
Yeah, so the article is looking at greenwashing from a different perspective. So obviously, when we talk about it normally, we think about it from the consumer perspective, consumers or customers, buyers, not, having the right information about a product or being oversold, basically. But this looks at it from an employee point of view. So, what does that do? If a business is called out for greenwashing, what does that do to those employees? And he talks about how, that really erodes the trust in the business. People feel like, take it quite personally, like they are being called out as well. And that actually, employees are actually a resource. They're a great resource for the business to help them tell their stories better, but that most of the time is not communicated or cascaded down very well within organizations. It's kind of it's either sort of happening at too high a level and then not cascaded down, or it is just done as a PR or marketing exercise where they're talking about the things that they probably should be doing but might not be doing, and it's not embedded in the organization and the problems that brings.
Malin, I'm going to just jump in here because I think you summarized that beautifully and perfectly. I think the thing for me is, and we've had conversations with other guests on the show previously where, people have talked about like the way you get sustainability right is you embed it across your organization. And what that alludes to is the idea that every single employee is essentially aware of and considering the impact that not only their role is having, but also perhaps their department and then the wider organization. And it's almost like greenwashing in that context just will create disillusionment in the individual who thinks, well, I can't even trust what the organization that I'm working for is presenting itself as doing. So how am I going to feel like I want to lean in to supporting the development of the sustainability credentials of the company itself? So it's almost like a complete failure in terms of internal comms failure on trying to achieve the ultimate outcome of engagement and essentially just creating complete disillusionment with the agenda that you're putting forward. Is that a fair synopsis of
definitely
how to get it wrong?
Yeah, completely. And it's interesting. We actually did a piece of research ourselves with the Carbon Literacy Project about this time last year. And one of the interesting stats that came out of that was that I think it was 30%. So this is with it's a survey of 500 B2B marketing and sales people in marketing and sales roles, and 30% of them said that they had put out information into the market that they weren't confident with, but they had been told to do so by management. They had no choice. And it's exactly that, isn't it? They know themselves, or they feel or they don't know enough. They don't feel like what they can put, that they can trust what they're putting out and that they believe in what they're putting out, which is just crazy, isn't it? And especially when these other people, particularly, I guess, sales, you're the face of the organization, aren't you? You're out there, meeting the customers every day.
It's fascinating. We actually, I remember the piece of research we did a couple of years ago with Future Build. One of the headlines was I can't remember what the percentage was, but it was a very high percentage of instances of people experiencing greenwashing through the sales executives that they were engaging with as being a key source of that external greenwashing. So, it obviously regardless of it being internal, the focus of the article, obviously it's going to seep through, if you like, to the external comms too, if you get this stuff wrong. The thing that kept on coming up for me in what you were just describing there was, again, we want people within our organizations to take ownership of sustainability in many ways, and ownership of our strategies and initiatives and things. If we're failing to communicate effectively and clearly with them, or even provide them with the toolkits, if you like, to be able to understand these issues, then they're never going to take ownership of it and be able to sort of advance the agenda themselves. I know you mentioned carbon literacy before. I know the article kind of talked about this quite a bit. What's your overall kind of impression, maybe in the UK, of how organizations are going about educating their teams on sustainability?
I think it depends on the size of the organization, obviously, and the sector that they're in. But, if I do really broad brush, I would say big organizations, what's happened is that a lot of them have obviously had to set these targets, because they are required to have a net zero target. They've set it, not quite sure how they're going to do it, but they've done it because they've had to. And then it just sits there at a strategic level and then is not being trickled down. And the team that's looking after that, generally speaking, in that type of organization, is a sustainability team that is completely, overstretched, because they can't possibly deliver a business strategy, with a team of, I don't know, big ones might be a handful of people, but generally speaking, it might just be one person, and they might not even have that kind of background. They just got an interest in doing something. And we're hearing that a lot, so, we do obviously deliver carbon literacy training. We're hearing a lot that they just don't, it's just seen as a side issue, not something that concerns everybody. And then the other side, then, smaller businesses, nobody probably owns the issue. And you're then relying on an already overstretched leadership team that doesn't necessarily have the knowledge, because it is quite technical, obviously, to deliver, and never mind communicating about it. They just don't know where to start, so they just park it. Although there is such a huge opportunity here, for businesses to lean into, because whether we like it or not, things are going to change. You're going to have to, one way or another, do something about it. And you're either kind of getting dragged along as an organization, or you can be on the front foot and, steal the march, basically. That's a sad thing.
Let me ask you, Malin, because it's fascinating on that sort of things. But I want to ask you about, in your experience, when you've seen internal communications around sustainability been done well, like, what have been the key characteristics in your mind of organizations that you've worked with that have done it well? Like, what does that look like? What does a good approach to internal comms around sustainability look like?
So a number of things. I'd say the first thing is that the leadership team gets trained first, so they genuinely understand the issues, so both the threats and the opportunities, because I don't think you have the impetus to move fast enough unless you understand both. And then in this case, then, so we've given them, a day's worth of training, carbon literacy training. We call it like our net zero masterclass, helping them understand opportunities and threats. But importantly, it's an action-driven course. So you have to come away, and you have to, in order to sort of be certified, you have to commit to take some action, both individually and as a group. And when they've then rolled that out across the organization, amazing things happen. Not everybody is going to be bought in, let's be clear. There will always be people who don't think it's for them, but the vast majority is. I've trained hundreds of people within one organization. And I met up with somebody very recently, and he said that, and he's the sustainability lead, and he said now they've got this group and they're coming to him all the time, like asking for the whole thing to be sped up. They are pushing. And the great thing about it is that, that kind of process helps break down this huge, big goal up here. It means that everybody understands where they fit in and what they can do to kickstart it. So, everybody comes away with an action. So it's amazing, it's amazing for leadership, but it's also really empowering for the team to be able to understand where they fit in and what their role is, and, whether they are, communicating internally or externally, because, everybody does a bit of that, don't they? If it's an office-based thing, which most of our clients are, and they get into it and they want to do more, basically. Not everybody, but a lot of people do.
And is it, Malin, is it because essentially what you've described so beautifully is that notion of, like, educate people and they will get inspired and they will get engaged and they will begin to really think about these things. And that's a fantastic starting point. Is the next step, I'm putting words in your mouth here, and feel free to shoot me down if this isn't the case, but is the next stage from there to go, well, now we need to start thinking about our sustainability strategy, and ultimately we're going to be working on that, but we want you as the wider team to have an opportunity to influence that and to therefore in some degree take ownership of it? And is that the sort of next stage of engagement, to take that enthusiasm and to actually get your stakeholders, your internal stakeholders, involved in the process of developing your sustainability strategy so they can take ownership of it? And ultimately at that point, then think about how you then communicate really clearly with your internal stakeholders to make sure that they're not only bought in, but very clear on what the strategy is and ultimately what we can and cannot say when it comes to our green credentials. Have I just oversimplified things, or is that a fair way of approaching?
No, that's definitely fair. I guess by, the businesses that do roll out the training, and I mean, there are loads of organizations. I mean, we are obviously not the only people delivering this kind of training. You got everybody from, I don't know, Auto Trade, somebody like, Beco, the washing machines and, all of those kind of things, to the NHS, etc. I guess by rolling out that kind of training, you're already inviting everybody to the party, aren't you? Because, like I said, part of it is coming up with the action plan. I think it's more about it helps translate this huge thing, the race to net zero, into something that means something for individuals. And it helps the individual, but it also helps the organization, because like we talked about before, if you're at that level, you can't always see all the different things that everybody within the organization can do. It's like pulling together to solve something. And yeah, definitely some of those people will then feed in. Most of the organizations, one of the key actions off the back of the training has been to create a group that represents all the different functions in the organization, to have a discussion and decide then what's next. So we've done this now, so what is next, and pushing for that. And that's what the guy that I was talking to only the other day, he was saying that it's fascinating. He's been banging that drum for years and years and years, and it's just unlocked so much internally. Like I said, not everybody's going to buy into it, but I think the big issue is understanding what you can do, individually, and as a department or whatever you are.
Can we? And I think you've nailed that in terms of how ultimately, in an ideal world, an organization would approach this. Out of interest, I think the article alluded to a number of occasions, talking about creating a cultural environment in which employees feel empowered to challenge, if you like, the green credentials essentially of the organization as they're presented, without fear for kind of professional repercussion, if you like. Again, just provide us with a bit of comment on that. How does that play out? Like, how do we ensure that there are those safeguards in place within organizations to make sure that can happen?
Yes, I think there's a number of things. I think very few people deliberately greenwash. I think the reason they do it is because they don't know that they're greenwashing. Clearly, there are people that are greenwashing and doing it deliberately. But I'd say on the whole, particularly when you're talking about people within an organization. And part of that is, of course, it's such a complicated, the terminology is shocking, isn't it? Like there's so much of it, how many acronyms can you throw at things? There's so many different, badges and all of this kind of stuff. So there's a lot to get your head around. And I think if you accept then, if you understand what's really happening, you understand the journey, and you understand your part in it, and that it is complicated, you don't expect anybody to get it right all the time. And I think this is where, even from the sort of external greenwashing perspective, we need to give people the space to, the whole progress over perfection thing, but still hold people accountable. So I think you have to really lean into that. We recognize we're not going to get it right all the time, because nobody does in anything. But also by helping everybody understand what some of the terminology means, also gives them the tool to challenge, doesn't it? So if somebody tells you something and you think, well, I know what that means, and that it's not possible, what you're saying is impossible, or actually ask some more questions to try and make sure that whoever is talking to you has thought it through. It's holding everybody accountable, isn't it? Both internally and externally. The more we understand, the better questions we can ask, and you don't feel as vulnerable either, do you? If you feel like you know your stuff enough, you can ask better questions. You don't have to be horrible about it. You just ask the questions in a way that helps everyone.
Yeah, it's a very, very, a great point. We want to encourage dialogue ultimately. Yeah. I think I had a show the other day, and I've used this term a few times now, and it was a chap, and we were talking about, I think in the last year, 47 of the top FTSE 100 companies in the UK have had restatements regarding their GHG emissions over the course of this year alone. And in terms of those restatements, I think it was like 70% was down to methodology changes or something around that. And 30% were just errors in things. And he used the term clumsy. And I love that term because I think it's a softening, if you like, of the collective experience that we're all going through. I think you're absolutely right. Like there are, but there aren't that many truly bad agents out there that are just trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. The majority of people we're just all a bit clumsy at the moment. And that's just where we are with things. Out of interest, in light of that, how do you view, obviously there's this growing, concern around green hushing and the impact of that. And we speak to people a lot about that from an external perspective and the implications of it in terms of, not sharing best practice, not being able to collaborate and ultimately improve as a collective. What's the impact of green hushing in your experience, Malin, from an internal comms perspective? Like what happens if an organization just is doing great stuff from a sustainability perspective, but ultimately is afraid of communicating it with its internal stakeholders for fear of all of the issues that you highlighted at the beginning of being thought of greenwashing?
So I think, it erodes, I guess, the trust again. So if the organization isn't confident enough to talk about it, it feels like either, they're not as confident as they make out to be. So, are they actually telling me the truth? So, it's that seed of doubt, I guess, sows a seed of doubt. And it would make you more nervous internally as well. Like, it creates that whole environment of nervousness in general, doesn't it? That you can't talk about it. Whereas instead, then if you say, this is what we're doing and we are not, but nobody's there yet. I mean, that's the whole thing, isn't it? Nobody's there. So these are the things we still have to do. And we can talk about the fact that these are still the things we need to do. And everybody has got things that they still need to do. So that's the opposite, isn't it? Then you feel empowered and you feel like you trust them. In a way that you don't if there's no communication. It's like that vacuum just creates, rumors. That's when all the whispering starts. What's going on? Are we actually doing what we're saying? What we're doing? And I'm doing this, but I'm not allowed to talk about it. Why is that? Is there something else that they're not telling us coming down the line? It's all that kind of insecurity that brings. And you're letting other conversations take place that are not helpful in any way.
That's so true. By not engaging in the dialogue, you're allowing the dialogue you're essentially having zero control over coming back to one of your points earlier, the narrative that's been told internally. And just picking up on one of the things that you said there, I think, again, I had a conversation the other day talking about, we've certainly seen a big impact since mandating that all of our signatories include where we can improve section within their green claims policies.
Yeah, I love that.
Because that is essentially like a disarming approach. Because as soon, and we talk about, I've spoken to a few of our signatories where we talk about the liberating nature of essentially being really clear and upfront. First thing that you're going to engage with is, we know that we are not a fully, a sustainable company, because there is no sustainable company out there. These are the areas that we're looking to address. This is how we're going to improve. And crucially, we know we're not going to get it right every time. And as soon as you position it like that, you're then able to speak confidently about the things that you have done and be proud of the things that you have done. So I completely concur with you on that. Malin, as expected, we've absolutely obliterated our time this morning. I whistled by. I'm going to conclude with the magic wand question. So I'd ask you, Malin, if we were to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the corporate world this instant, what would that one thing be?
Exactly what we talked about. So it's removing the emperor's clothes. It's that whole, everybody's pretending that they are somewhere that they're not. And the minute you take that away and everybody starts having more honest conversations, we can move so much faster, that it's all right not to have it all, done and dusted and, neatly packaged. Nobody's there.
And sorry to sorry, I'm just going to make this quick. I think what's so interesting is that it just creates such a clear alignment with the experience that you had all those years ago in school in Sweden, and the fact that, you know, you bring everyone together within a classroom and everybody's there to support one another and nurture one another, and that actually there's beauty in the compassion and empathy and understanding that can develop from that environment. So sorry, I know you wanted to carry on, but I just think it's so interesting that we started the conversation there, and ultimately the magic wand is for us to apply a bit more of that within the corporate world.
Yeah, exactly. It's just recognizing, you know, it's a huge challenge, but actually if we stop pretending that we're nearly there, we're going to get there quicker.
Here. What a brilliant way to, I think sometimes we get magic wand suggestions that seem like, I'll be honest, we had one yesterday that seemed quite well, was really, really ambitious.
Yeah.
But I feel like that, what you've just suggested there is a collective mindset shift that, you know, presumably with things like B Corp and things like, you know, the work that you guys are doing with the Carbon Literacy Project, you know, hopefully we're going to see more of that in you know, come into play. Malin, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I've absolutely loved that conversation. It's flashed by. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I loved it. It was great. Thank you very much.